You know what pure rage feels like? Watching some entitled woman from Chicago steal your only tractor 24 hours before harvest while your $20,000 crop is about to die. Claire Wright stood there taking selfies as my equipment got hauled away, thinking she just crushed another helpless farm family with her fake legal papers. That woman picked the wrong farmer on the wrong day. What happened next will shock you. Comment on your craziest Karen story. You should have seen Monica that Monday morning in early October, stepping out of her pristine white BMW like she owned the entire state of Iowa. Designer Chanel suits that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage. Those red-soled Louis Vuitton heels clicking against my gravel driveway like some kind of death march. I'm standing there in my work boots and faded Carhartt jacket, looking at this woman who clearly hadn't spent a single day doing actual work in her entire life. "Mr. Brooks," she says, voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We need to discuss your equipment situation." Equipment situation? Lady, this is a working farm, not some suburban subdivision where you can dictate what people park in their driveways. But there she was, waving around this official-looking clipboard like it was some kind of magic wand that gave her authority over my property. The whole thing started 6 months earlier when Monica moved into the Henderson place. That's the old farmhouse about 2.5 miles down County Road 12. Mrs. Henderson had passed away the previous winter, and her kids sold the property to this mysterious cash buyer from Chicago. It should have been our first red flag, honestly. Who moves from Chicago to rural Jefferson County, Iowa, population 3,200? Unless they're running from something. Monica showed up to our church potluck that spring with homemade apple pie and a sob story about being a divorced woman looking for a fresh start in a wholesome community. She seemed genuinely interested in farm life, asking all the right questions about crop rotation and soil management. Hell, she even volunteered to help with the church's Harvest Festival planning committee. But looking back now, I realize every conversation was an interrogation disguised as friendly small talk. "Oh, Joseph, how do you manage financially with just the farm income?" And Emma seems so bright. College must be expensive these days. And my personal favorite, it must be lonely sometimes, raising a teenage daughter on your own. And the woman was building a psychological profile like some kind of FBI profiler, except instead of catching criminals, she was planning to become one. The night everything changed was at the church potluck in early September. Monica had been extra attentive all evening, touching my arm when she laughed, standing just a little too close when we talked. When most folks had headed home and we were cleaning up, she cornered me by the coffee station and went for it. Leaned in close, put her hand on my chest, and whispered, "Joseph, I think we'd be good together." I stepped back, not aggressively, just clearly establishing boundaries, and said as gently as I could, "Monica, I appreciate the friendship, but I'm not ready for anything romantic. I hope you understand." For exactly 2 seconds, her mask slipped completely. The fake smile vanished. Her eyes went dead cold like a shark's, and I saw something that made every instinct in my body scream danger. Then, just as quickly, the sweet smile snapped back into place and she said, "Of course I understand completely," but her voice had changed. There was this underlying current of rage that she couldn't quite hide. She gathered her purse and jacket, said her polite goodbyes to everyone else, and left. I thought that was the end of it. Boy, was I wrong. So, there I was that Monday morning, 48 hours before a massive storm system was supposed to roll through central Iowa with $20,000 worth of corn that needed to come off the field immediately, or we'd lose everything. The Weather Service was predicting sustained winds over 50 miles per hour and 3 inches of rain, the kind of storm that turned standing corn into worthless livestock feed. Emma and I had been working 16-hour days trying to get ahead of the weather, and my grandfather's old John Deere was absolutely critical to the operation. That tractor isn't just equipment to us. It's family history. Grandpa bought it brand new in 1998 as a wedding gift to my father, and Dad taught me to drive on that very machine when I was 8 years old. Emma learned to drive it just last year, continuing a 3-generation tradition. Monica stood there in my driveway, designer heels slowly sinking into the soft dirt, waving around this official-looking document with what appeared to be genuine township seals and everything. Rural Agricultural Association notice of violation, she announced dramatically, like she was reading a court verdict. County Code 47.3b, agricultural equipment storage violations in designated residential zones. I took the document and immediately noticed things that didn't add up. The font changed halfway through the second paragraph. The seal wasn't quite aligned properly, and the signature looked like it had been traced rather than signed naturally. But with the storm bearing down and thousands of dollars on the line, I didn't have time to play detective with whatever game Monica was running. "Ma'am, I understand you're new to the area," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "But this is a working farm with state contracts. That tractor is essential equipment, and I've got 48 hours to bring in my crop before the storm hits." Monica's response was to pull out her phone and dial a number she clearly had ready to go. "Yes, this is Claire Wright with the Rural Agricultural Association. We have a non-compliance situation at the Brooks property on County Road 12. Yes, we'll need the tractor removed immediately. The tow truck arrived exactly 30 minutes later. She had obviously prearranged the whole thing." Tom Patterson, the driver, looked as uncomfortable as I felt. His family had farmed in this county for generations before economic pressures forced them to sell out. And he knew exactly what losing harvest equipment meant to a farming operation. Emma came running out of the house when she heard the truck backing up to my tractor, her phone already recording everything. That kid has good instincts, probably gets it from her mother. "Dad, she can't do this, can she?" she asked, voice shaking with a combination of anger and disbelief. I wanted to tell her no, wanted to say that justice and common sense would prevail. But watching my family's heritage getting chained to a flatbed truck while some Chicago transplant took selfies with the whole scene, I honestly wasn't sure anymore. The towing fee was $200 up front, plus $50 per day storage. And Mike mumbled something about how sorry he was while he handed me the paperwork. "County authorization," he said. Not quite meeting my eyes. My hands are tied. As the truck pulled away with 3 generations of family history chained to its bed, Monica turned to me with the most self-satisfied smirk I'd ever seen. "Maybe next time you'll be more cooperative, Joseph," she said, adjusting her designer scarf against the Iowa wind. That's when my phone started buzzing in my pocket. A call from a number I didn't recognize with a Des Moines area code. I answered without thinking, my attention still focused on the taillights of the tow truck disappearing down County Road 12. "Mr. Brooks, this is Detective Stone with the State Agricultural Crime Unit. We received an automated alert from monitoring equipment on your property." "Sir, are you currently safe? What does Joseph know about state protection that Monica doesn't?" Let me tell you something about Detective Mark Stone, the man who probably saved my entire livelihood with one phone call. When he said State Agricultural Crime Unit, I honestly thought it was some kind of scam at first. I mean, who even knew there was such a thing as agricultural crime? But Ryan's voice had this non-nonsense quality that immediately told me he was the real deal. And when he mentioned automated alerts from monitoring equipment, something clicked in my brain. Those state sensors I'd casually mentioned to Monica, the ones monitoring soil moisture and crop conditions for the university research program, they weren't just agricultural monitors. They were full-spectrum security systems with high-definition cameras and audio recording capabilities installed because the state takes protection of its research investments very seriously indeed. Ryan arrived at my farm within 15 minutes of that phone call, driving an unmarked pickup truck that looked like it belonged in rural Iowa rather than some government motor pool. The man himself was about 45, built like someone who had spent time doing actual farm work before becoming a law enforcement officer. And he spoke with the kind of agricultural knowledge that immediately put me at ease. "Mr. Brooks, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened here," he said, pulling out a tablet computer and what looked like some kind of digital document scanner. "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." So, I told him about Monica's 6-month campaign, the church potluck rejection, the fake township documents, and the convenient tow truck arrival, Ryan listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making notes. And when I finished, he asked to see the paperwork Monica had left behind. The document analysis took about 10 minutes, during which Ryan made several phone calls to various county offices and ran the paperwork through some kind of verification system on his tablet. "Mr. Brooks," he said finally, "this document is completely fraudulent. The Rural Agricultural Association doesn't exist, never has existed, and this township seal is a high-quality forgery, but it's still a forgery. More importantly, this woman has interfered with state property that's protected under federal agricultural research laws." The relief I felt hearing those words was like someone lifting a 10,000-pound weight off my chest. But Ryan wasn't finished. "We're going to get your equipment back immediately, and then we're going to have a very serious conversation with Miss Wright about her understanding of agricultural law." The next phone call Ryan made was to Stone Brothers Towing. Apparently, they keep track of all equipment removal orders in the county system. Poor Tom Patterson was already on his way back with my tractor before Ryan even finished explaining the situation. "Tell your driver he's not in any trouble," Ryan assured whoever was on the other end. "But that equipment needs to be returned to its original location immediately, and there won't be any charges to Mr. Brooks for the return trip." Then Ryan did something that absolutely stunned me. He called Monica directly, using information from her fraudulent documents to track down her phone number. "Miss Wright, this is Detective Stone with the State Agricultural Crime Unit. You need to meet me at the Brooks property within the next 30 minutes to discuss your interference with state operations." While we waited for Monica to arrive, Ryan explained the broader picture that I'd been completely unaware of. "Mr. Brooks, your state lease makes this property and all associated equipment federally protected assets. What Miss Wright did today isn't just harassment or fraud. It's interference with federal agricultural research, which carries some very serious penalties." He showed me the surveillance footage from the state monitoring system, crystal clear video and audio of Monica's entire performance from multiple angles. She threatened you, made false claims about her authority, and knowingly interfered with state operations. This isn't her first rodeo either. We've been tracking similar complaints from other rural areas, but this is the first time someone was stupid enough to target state property. Monica arrived 25 minutes later, her BMW screeching to a halt in my driveway and kicking up gravel that probably cost more per stone than most people spend on lunch. She stepped out of that car like she was walking into a business meeting. She was certain to win, clipboard in hand, and that same arrogant smile plastered across her face. But the smile started to falter when she saw Ryan's official vehicle and the way he was standing, hands clasped behind his back, shoulders square every inch the law enforcement officer. "I don't understand why I'm being harassed by some supposed state official," she began. But Ryan cut her off before she could really get rolling. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification, and then we're going to discuss your activities on this property." The next 20 minutes were absolutely fascinating to watch. Monica went through every manipulation tactic in her playbook: fake confusion, manufactured outrage, claims of being the real victim, even crocodile tears at one point. But Ryan had seen it all before. And more importantly, he had video evidence of everything she'd done. "Miss, right? You presented fraudulent documents, impersonated a government official, and interfered with state agricultural operations. These are serious criminal charges." That's when Monica's lawyer training kicked in, and she started demanding to see warrants and questioning Ryan's authority, and generally acting like every entitled suspect you've ever seen on a police procedural show. The problem was Ryan knew the law better than she did, and he had backup arriving. The search of Monica's vehicle revealed a treasure trove of evidence that even I wasn't prepared for. File folders with detailed information on 8 different rural families in our county, including complete financial profiles, family schedules, and what appeared to be vulnerability assessments, professional-grade printing and laminating equipment in her trunk, along with templates for various official-looking documents. But the thing that really got my attention was the file labeled Brooks GISF Priority Target. Inside were surveillance photos of Emma and me going about our daily routines, copies of our mortgage documents somehow obtained from God knows where, and handwritten notes about our family situation that were disturbingly accurate and deeply personal. Ryan's backup turned out to be a full evidence recovery team, complete with a search warrant for Monica's residence. Apparently, when you mess with federal agricultural research, the state takes it very seriously indeed. Monica stood there in my driveway watching her perfectly planned operation fall apart in real time. And for the first time since this whole thing started, she looked genuinely afraid. "This is all a misunderstanding," she kept repeating, but her voice was getting higher and more desperate with each repetition. "I was just trying to improve property values in the community." Ryan's response was beautifully simple. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for fraud, impersonation of a government official, and interference with state agricultural operations." The search of Monica's house revealed the full scope of what we were dealing with. Essentially, a document forgery operation, sophisticated enough to fool most people who weren't specifically trained to spot fake government paperwork. Wall-to-wall fake notices for 15 different Iowa farming families, complete with research files that read like military intelligence reports. Professional printing equipment that probably costs more than my annual equipment budget, and legal templates sophisticated enough to fool county clerks and towing companies. But the most disturbing discovery was the evidence of her previous operations. Files from Minnesota in 2021 and Wisconsin in 2022 showing that 32 other families had already fallen victim to her systematic predatory targeting. Monica was released on $50,000 bail pending trial, which meant she was back in the community within hours of her arrest. That evening, as Emma and I worked frantically to get the corn harvested before the storm hit, my phone buzzed with an anonymous text message. The photo showed Emma walking home from school that afternoon, taken with a telephoto lens by someone watching our family. The message was simple but chilling. "Tell your daddy, pretty girls have accidents in small towns." As Monica's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear outside the county courthouse, her confident smile vanished completely. She glanced at me with pure panic in her eyes for the first time since this whole nightmare began. What did her lawyer just tell her about state agricultural laws? The real Monica. Right, not the church-going apple pie baking facade she'd been wearing for 6 months, revealed herself over the next 48 hours in ways that honestly shocked me. And I thought I'd seen the worst of human nature during my time in the Army Reserves. Detective Stone called me early Wednesday morning with information that made my blood run cold. Monica wasn't some amateur troublemaker who'd gotten in over her head. She was a professional predator who had been systematically destroying rural families for 3 solid years. "Mr. Brooks, we've confirmed operations in Minnesota during 2021 and Wisconsin during 2022, Ryan explained over coffee in my kitchen while Emma got ready for school. 32 families destroyed through fake fees, forced property sales, and systematic harassment campaigns. She always targets the same profile: widowed fathers with teenage children, always during critical farming seasons when families are most vulnerable financially and emotionally. The pattern was sickeningly consistent across 3 states and dozens of victims. Monica would spend months researching potential targets, move into their communities under some false pretense, establish herself as a helpful neighbor or community volunteer, then systematically destroy families using their own kindness and trust against them. In Minnesota, she'd posed as a social worker, helping struggling farming families access government assistance programs, while actually filing false reports that got children temporarily removed from homes and properties seized for SWIFTY violations. In Wisconsin, she'd created a fake agricultural consulting business that convinced desperate farmers to sign contracts that gave her legal authority over their financial decisions, then bankrupted them through fees and forced equipment sales. Iowa was supposed to be her next hunting ground, and my family was supposed to be her first victims. The financial devastation is extraordinary, Ryan continued, showing me documentation from previous cases. $300,000 stolen through fake fees, forced sales, and fraudulent contracts over 3 years. But the psychological damage is even worse. 5 families lost their homes entirely. 12 children were traumatized by fake child services investigations. And at least 3 marriages didn't survive the stress. I'm looking at these files, seeing photos of families who looked exactly like Emma and me, hardworking people who trusted the wrong woman. And I'm getting angrier by the minute. Not just angry, but professionally offended. See, Monica had made one critical miscalculation about Joseph Brooks. She had assumed that because I was a widowed farmer in rural Iowa, I must be some kind of helpless rube who'd roll over the moment someone in a suit started making legal threats. What Monica didn't know about me could fill a book. But here are the highlights. 22 years in the Army Reserves, including 3 deployments, where I learned that the most dangerous enemies are the ones who smile while they're planning to destroy you. A bachelor's degree in agricultural business from Iowa State for third-generation farmers who want to stay in business, better understand modern markets and regulations, and most importantly, a state agricultural research contract that came with extensive training on agricultural law, federal protections, and exactly what constitutes interference with government operations. Monica had picked the one farmer in Jefferson County who actually knew his legal rights and had the resources to fight back effectively. The psychological warfare escalated immediately after her arrest. Anonymous phone calls to Emma's school claiming I was an unstable veteran who posed a danger to students. Fake reports to child services alleging neglect and abuse, resulting in an investigation that terrified Emma and infuriated me. Fraudulent complaints to our mortgage company claiming I'd misrepresented my income, triggering a financial review that could have jeopardized our home. Monica was using every weapon in her arsenal, and she was doing it with the precision of someone who'd perfected these techniques through years of practice on dozens of families who didn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back effectively. But here's what Monica didn't count on. Lily Brooks is not your average 16-year-old farm kid. That girl inherited her mother's intelligence and her father's stubborn refusal to be intimidated by bullies. When Monica's harassment campaign targeted Emma directly, my daughter didn't curl up in a corner and hope for rescue. She got mad, and then she got strategic. Emma started documenting everything with the kind of systematic precision that would make an FBI forensics team proud. Every anonymous phone call recorded, every fake document photographed and preserved, every threatening encounter filmed from multiple angles. "Dad?" she told me one evening while we were reviewing the evidence. "This woman thinks she's smarter than everyone else, but she's making mistakes. We just need to be patient and let her hang herself." The community response was complicated. About half of our neighbors rallied around our family immediately, especially the ones who had been farming long enough to understand what losing equipment during harvest season actually means. But Monica had spent 6 months building relationships and establishing credibility, and some folks weren't ready to believe that the helpful, church-going woman they'd grown to trust was actually a calculating predator. "Maybe there's been some misunderstanding," was a phrase I heard more than once. "Monica seems like such a nice lady. Surely you two can work this out like adults." It was frustrating as hell, honestly. Here I am with law enforcement backing and video evidence, and people are still giving Monica the benefit of the doubt because she brought cookies to the church bake sale. The breaking point came when Monica made her biggest mistake. She got desperate. Facing serious criminal charges and realizing that her usual manipulation tactics weren't working on me or Detective Stone, she decided to up the ante stakes in a way that revealed just how truly dangerous she was. Over the following days, Monica's harassment escalated through anonymous messages and following Emma home from school, building toward her most desperate move yet. That evening, I found Emma in her room, shaking with a combination of fear and rage that reminded me painfully of her mother during Anna's worst days fighting cancer. "Dad, she's not going to stop," Emma said, showing me the video she'd recorded during Monica's harassment. "She knows the system. She knows how to work around the law, and she's done this to other families who didn't have our advantages. What happens to the next family after us?" That's when I realized we weren't just fighting for ourselves anymore. We were fighting for every rural family that Monica might target in the future. This wasn't just about getting our tractor back or protecting our property. This was about stopping a predator who had already destroyed dozens of lives and would continue destroying lives until someone with the resources and knowledge to fight back actually stood up and said enough. Over the weekend, Detective Stone, Emma, and I prepared our evidence for the upcoming township meeting where the community would finally learn the truth about Monica's operation. We organized documentation from her previous victims, compiled Emma's digital evidence, and prepared for what would be our decisive public confrontation. Monica stared directly at me across the courthouse parking lot after that community meeting and mouthed 5 words that made my blood run cold. I know about Anna's death. But what secret about Emma's future does Monica think she knows? If someone threatened your child like this, what would you do? Drop your answer below. You want to know what it feels like when someone threatens to weaponize your dead wife's memory against your daughter? It feels like being gut punched by someone wearing brass knuckles while they're smiling at you. Monica's threat about Anna wasn't just emotional terrorism. It was strategic psychological warfare designed to make me back down and accept whatever hell she had planned for my family. The problem is Claire Wright had never encountered a farmer with military training who'd already lost the most important person in his world and had nothing left to lose except his daughter's future. Instead of intimidating me, her threat did something much more dangerous for her. It pissed me off. The first thing I did was exactly what Anna would have done in this situation. I got organized. 22 years in the Army Reserves teach you that emotional responses get people killed, while systematic planning and methodical execution win wars. Because make no mistake, this was war. Now, Monica had escalated from property harassment to direct threats against Emma, and she'd made it clear that she was willing to attack the memory of my deceased wife to achieve her goals. So I did what any good soldier does when facing a superior enemy force. I leveraged my advantages and exploited her weaknesses while building a coalition of allies who could help me achieve tactical superiority. My first call was to the Iowa State Extension Office, where I'd maintained relationships with agricultural specialists for over 15 years through my state research contract. These folks deal with rural property disputes and agricultural harassment cases regularly, and they knew exactly which legal resources were available to farmers facing systematic targeting. Within 2 hours, I had contact information for 3 attorneys who specialized in agricultural law, a victim's advocate who worked specifically with rural families facing harassment, and a state legislator who'd been pushing for stronger protections against agricultural interference. Monica might have her law degree, but I had an entire network of agricultural professionals who dealt with people like her as part of their daily jobs. Next, I contacted the agricultural publications that covered Iowa farming. Not the glossy magazines you see in grocery stores, but the serious trade journals that actual farmers read for market information and policy updates. The story of a serial agricultural predator targeting rural families was exactly the kind of content these publications existed to cover, and they had the credibility and reach to warn other farming communities about Monica's methods. Within 48 hours, Fake HOA Scammer Targets Iowa Farmers was the lead story in 3 different agricultural newsletters with a combined readership of over 50,000 farming families across the Midwest. But my most important strategic move was leveraging my military connections. The Army Reserve Network includes a lot of people who understand both legal systems and investigative procedures, and several of my former unit members had transitioned into law enforcement careers after their military service. Through completely legal channels, I was able to connect Detective Stone with investigators in Minnesota and Wisconsin who'd been tracking Monica's previous operations. More importantly, I learned that Monica had made critical mistakes in those states that could be used as evidence in Iowa proceedings. She was good at manipulation and document forgery, but she wasn't nearly as smart as she thought she was about covering her digital tracks. Emma, meanwhile, was conducting her own strategic campaign using skills I didn't even know she possessed. My 16-year-old daughter had apparently been learning advanced digital research techniques through some online courses she'd been taking during her spare time. And she was systematically documenting Monica's harassment campaign with the kind of thoroughness that would impress a professional investigator. Every threatening message was preserved with metadata intact. Every harassing phone call was recorded and transcribed, and every piece of fraudulent documentation was photographed and analyzed for inconsistencies. Dad. Emma told me one evening while showing me her evidence files. Mom taught me that bullies depend on their victims being too scared or too confused to fight back effectively. But if you document everything and stay organized, they usually hang themselves. Monica's response to our systematic resistance was to escalate her psychological warfare in ways that revealed just how dangerous she actually was. She began filing false reports with multiple agencies simultaneously. Child Services, the State Agricultural Department, our mortgage company, even the IRS, creating a bureaucratic nightmare designed to overwhelm us with paperwork and investigations while draining our time and financial resources. Each false report required hours of our time to refute, generated paperwork that had to be preserved for potential legal proceedings, and created stress that was clearly designed to pressure us into accepting some kind of settlement that would allow Monica to move on to her next victims. The college sabotage campaign was probably the most evil thing Monica did during this entire ordeal. Emma had been working toward admission to Iowa State's agricultural engineering program since her freshman year of high school, maintaining a 4.0 grade average while taking advanced mathematics and science courses that challenged even the brightest students. Monica somehow obtained Emma's college application information and began sending detailed letters to admissions offices, claiming that Emma came from an unstable household with an erratic father who had substance abuse issues and financial problems that could affect tuition payments. These letters were sophisticated enough to look legitimate and specific enough to raise genuine concerns among admissions counselors who had no way of knowing they were complete fabrications. When Emma discovered what Monica was doing to her college prospects, I watched my daughter transform from scared teenager to determined young woman in real time. She wants to destroy my future because you rejected her advances, Emma said, her voice steady with controlled anger that reminded me powerfully of her mother. But she doesn't understand that Brooks women don't give up without a fight, and Brooks men don't abandon their daughters when things get difficult. That afternoon, Emma drafted her own letters to every college admissions office that had received Monica's lies. Not defensive explanations or emotional appeals, but factual documentation of the harassment campaign with supporting evidence and law enforcement contact information. Several admissions counselors actually called to express their support and apologize for having to deal with such an unusual situation. The financial attacks were Monica's final attempt to force us into submission through economic pressure. Using her knowledge of legal procedures, she filed a series of liens and financial claims against our property that were technically legal paperwork filed in the wrong jurisdictions with incorrect information. Each filing required expensive legal consultation to resolve, generated credit reporting issues that affected our farming operations line of credit, and created exactly the kind of financial emergency that could force a family to accept an unfavorable settlement. Monica was trying to recreate the economic pressure that had worked against her previous victims, families who didn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back against systematic legal harassment. But Monica had made a critical miscalculation about the Brooks family financial situation. Our state agricultural research contract included legal insurance specifically designed to protect farmers from harassment and frivolous litigation. And my military benefits included access to legal assistance that specialized in exactly these kinds of targeting campaigns. Instead of bankrupting us with legal fees, Monica's escalation was actually triggering additional resources and support that made our position stronger rather than weaker. By the end of the week, we had 3 different attorneys working on our case, full documentation of Monica's pattern of predatory behavior, and a growing coalition of agricultural advocates who were determined to use our case as a precedent for protecting other rural families. Emma handed me a printed email that Friday evening, her face pale with controlled anger. "Dad, she sent this to every college on my list," she said, her voice shaking slightly. I read the first line about my alleged history of domestic violence and financial irresponsibility, and my hands started shaking with rage. What lie is so devastating it could destroy Emma's entire future? The college sabotage email contains specific lies designed to destroy Emma's future, claims about my alleged anger management issues and Emma's dysfunctional household. But Monica's metadata fingerprints were all over the document. What Monica didn't realize was that Emma had been expecting this escalation and had already prepared a counter strategy that would turn her attack into our advantage. My daughter had spent 2 weeks researching agricultural law and digital evidence preservation, learning about metadata analysis and document authentication techniques that most adults don't understand. "Dad," Emma explained while showing me her research, "every digital document contains hidden information about when it was created, what software was used, and even what computer generated it. If Monica has been creating fake documents, we can prove it scientifically." Emma had been quietly collecting every piece of paperwork Monica had generated, and she'd been working with a computer science teacher at her high school to analyze the digital fingerprints of each document. The breakthrough came when Emma discovered that all of Monica's fake documents, the HOA notices, the college sabotage emails, the false reports to various agencies, had been created using the same computer with the same software configuration. More importantly, the metadata showed that most of the documents had been created weeks or even months before the events they supposedly documented. Monica had been planning her harassment campaign in advance, creating templates and preparing attacks before she even initiated contact with her victims. "She's not just a liar," Emma told me with satisfaction. "She's a systematic fraud who's been documenting her own crimes without realizing it." But Monica wasn't finished with her escalation campaign. When the college sabotage didn't immediately break our family's resistance, she decided to target the one thing she thought would definitely force my surrender: Emma's physical safety. The direct threat started small, anonymous phone calls to our house claiming that accidents happen to farm girls who don't know their place, but they quickly escalated to more specific and disturbing threats. Monica began following Emma to and from school, parking her BMW in locations where Emma would definitely notice her presence, but where her behavior couldn't technically be classified as stalking under Iowa law. She was testing boundaries and escalating pressure while maintaining plausible deniability. The psychological warfare reached its peak when Monica confronted Emma directly outside our church following Sunday morning services. "Your father doesn't understand what he's dealing with," Monica told Emma in front of multiple witnesses who would later testify about the encounter. "I've destroyed stronger families than yours, and I know secrets about your mother's death that would devastate your father's reputation in this community." Emma's response was perfect. She didn't argue or defend. She just kept her phone recording while Monica continued making threats. "Pretty girls who interfere with adult business sometimes learn lessons they never forget," Monica continued, apparently unaware that every word was being captured on video with crystal clear audio quality. That Sunday evening, Emma and I sat down to plan our final counterattack against Monica's harassment campaign. We had documentation of her fraud, evidence of her systematic targeting of rural families, recordings of her direct threats, and digital proof that she'd been planning her attacks in advance. But most importantly, we had something Monica didn't know about: a community meeting scheduled for Tuesday evening where the township supervisors would be voting on new agricultural protection ordinances. Emma's idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Instead of just defending ourselves against Monica's attacks, we would use the township meeting as a platform to expose her entire operation and rally community support for systemic changes that would protect future victims. The township meeting was held in the high school gymnasium to accommodate the unusually large crowd of farmers and residents who'd heard about the agricultural harassment issue on the agenda. Monica arrived early, dressed in her most conservative business suit and carrying a briefcase full of what she probably assumed were convincing legal documents. She'd clearly prepared for this meeting as her final opportunity to convince the community that she was the real victim of harassment by an unstable veteran who couldn't accept rejection from a sophisticated woman. Her opening statement was a masterpiece of manipulation, describing herself as a concerned newcomer who'd tried to help improve community standards, but had been threatened and harassed by a man who clearly had anger management issues related to his military service and difficulty processing his wife's death. Monica's performance was actually quite impressive. She managed to generate genuine sympathy from several community members who didn't know the full story of her background. She presented herself as a successful professional woman who had moved to Iowa seeking peace and community, only to be victimized by a hostile neighbor who couldn't tolerate having his farming practices questioned by an outsider. She even produced crocodile tears when describing how frightened she'd been by my aggressive behavior and how concerned she was of Emma growing up in such an unstable household environment. For about 15 minutes, Monica actually seemed to be winning the public relations battle. That's when Emma stood up to address the township supervisors and the assembled community. My 16-year-old daughter walked to the front of that gymnasium with the confidence of someone who knew she held all the winning cards. And she began her presentation with a simple statement that changed the entire dynamic of the meeting. Mrs. Wright has been lying to this community for 6 months, and I can prove it with scientific evidence that will hold up in any court in America. Emma then proceeded to present the most devastating 15-minute presentation I've ever witnessed, systematically demolishing Monica's credibility using digital evidence, timeline analysis, and documentation from Monica's previous victims in other states. The metadata analysis was particularly devastating because it proved that Monica had been planning her harassment campaign months in advance. Emma showed the township supervisors exactly when each fake document had been created, which software had been used, and how the digital fingerprints proved that Monica had been systematically forging official documents. The college sabotage emails were particularly damaging because they showed that Monica had researched Emma's academic record and college applications before making her romantic advances toward me, proving that targeting my daughter had always been part of her plan rather than a response to my rejection of her advances. But the moment that completely destroyed Monica's credibility was when Emma played the recording from the church parking lot where Monica had threatened to reveal secrets about your mother's death. The silence in that gymnasium was absolute, as 300 community members listened to Monica's voice making threats against a 16-year-old girl using the memory of her deceased mother as a weapon. When the recording finished, you could have heard a pin drop in that room. Monica sat frozen in her chair, apparently realizing for the first time that every manipulative word she'd spoken had been captured and preserved for posterity. Monica's response to Emma's presentation was exactly what we'd hoped for, a complete emotional breakdown that revealed her true personality to the entire community. She began screaming at Emma, calling her a manipulative little who had destroyed everything with her lies and fabrications. She accused me of brainwashing my daughter and using her as a weapon against an innocent woman who had only been trying to help our community. The more she talked, the more unhinged she became. And the more clearly everyone in that room could see the calculating predator behind the helpful neighbor facade she'd been wearing for 6 months. Monica's mask dropped completely as she screamed at me across that crowded gymnasium. "You think your farm boy network can stop me? I'll destroy everything you hold dear." The entire room went silent as 300 people watched Monica reveal her true nature in real time. What secret could Monica possibly know about a woman who died 3 years ago? Monica's courtroom breakdown was even more spectacular than her township meeting meltdown. Probably because she finally understood that her usual manipulation tactics weren't going to work against a federal prosecutor who'd been dealing with agricultural fraud cases for over a decade. The charges against Monica had escalated significantly once Detective Stone's investigation uncovered the full scope of her multi-state operation. Fraud, extortion, harassment, interference with federal agricultural research, identity theft, and cyberstalking were just the beginning of a list that eventually included 17 separate federal charges. Monica's bail had been revoked after her public threats against Emma, so she'd been sitting in county jail for 2 weeks leading up to the trial, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of her designer suits, and looking increasingly desperate as her legal situation deteriorated. The prosecution's case was devastatingly thorough, built around Emma's digital evidence, and supported by testimony from Monica's previous victims. The evidence was overwhelming. Forensics confirmed document forgery. Financial records showed fraudulent collections, and victim testimony proved identical harassment patterns across multiple states. Monica's defense strategy was pathetic in its transparency. She claimed that she was the real victim of harassment by unstable rural men who couldn't tolerate an educated, independent woman questioning their traditional farming practices. Her attorney actually tried to argue that Emma's digital evidence was fabricated by a technologically sophisticated teenager who was helping her father frame an innocent woman for crimes she didn't commit. The jury's reaction to that argument was visible skepticism, especially after they had heard recordings of Monica making specific threats against a 16-year-old girl. When you're trying to convince people that a high school student is sophisticated enough to fake digital metadata, while simultaneously arguing that the same student is a victim of parental manipulation, you've already lost your credibility. The victim impact statements were emotionally devastating for Monica's remaining credibility. 12 families from 3 different states testified about how Monica's harassment campaigns had destroyed their lives, cost them their homes, and traumatized their children. The financial damage alone was staggering. Over $300,000 in fraudulent collections, forced property sales, and legal fees that families couldn't afford to fight her systematic attacks. But the psychological damage was even worse. Children who'd been subjected to fake child services investigations, marriages that hadn't survived the stress of systematic legal harassment, and elderly farmers who'd lost family properties that had been in their families for generations. Judge Patricia Reynolds had clearly done her homework on agricultural fraud cases, and her questions during the sentencing phase showed that she understood exactly what kind of predator she was dealing with. "Miss Wright," the judge said directly to Monica during the final hearing, "you have systematically exploited the trust and kindness of rural communities to destroy families for your own financial gain. You've traumatized children, bankrupted hardworking families, and used your legal knowledge as a weapon against people who trusted you because of your position in their communities. This court views your behavior as particularly heinous because you specifically targeted vulnerable families during their most difficult times." The final sentence was everything we'd hoped for and more. 8 years in federal prison plus 2 years in state prison to be served consecutively rather than concurrently, $300,000 in restitution to be paid to victim families, permanent forfeiture of all assets, including her BMW and the Henderson property, and 5 years of supervised probation after release, with specific restrictions preventing her from moving to rural communities or engaging in any activities related to property management or agricultural consulting. Judge Reynolds made it clear that Monica would be monitored for the rest of her life to prevent her from victimizing other families. Monica's reaction to the sentencing was a final demonstration of her complete inability to accept responsibility for her actions. Instead of showing remorse or acknowledging the harm she'd caused, she used her final statement to the court to attack me and Emma personally, claiming that we'd conspired to destroy an innocent woman and that her conviction was the result of rural prejudice against educated urban professionals. Even facing 10 years in prison, Monica couldn't stop herself from playing the victim and attacking the families she'd tried to destroy. Judge Reynolds actually had to threaten contempt charges to get Monica to stop interrupting other people's statements with accusations and protests. The community response to Monica's conviction was overwhelmingly positive, but it came with an unexpected revelation that reminded us how much damage one person can cause to rural communities. During the weeks following the trial, 7 additional families came forward with stories about suspicious interactions they had had with Monica during her 6 months in our community. She'd apparently been conducting preliminary research on multiple potential targets, building files, and gathering information that she would have used for future harassment campaigns if our case hadn't exposed her operation. Detective Stone estimated that Monica could have destroyed 20 or 30 more families in Iowa alone if she hadn't made the mistake of targeting a farmer with state agricultural research contracts and federal protections. Emma's role in exposing Monica's operation had attracted attention from several agricultural colleges and law enforcement agencies interested in her digital investigation techniques. Iowa State University offered Emma early admission to their agricultural engineering program, along with a full scholarship that covered tuition, room, board, and expenses for 4 years. The State Agricultural Crime Unit offered her a paid internship that would begin during her senior year of high school, focusing on digital evidence analysis and fraud prevention education for rural communities. My daughter had turned her traumatic experience into a platform for helping other families avoid becoming victims of similar predators. The financial recovery for our family was better than I dared to hope during the worst days of Monica's harassment campaign. The restitution payment covered all of our legal expenses and compensated us for the lost income and property damage caused by Monica's interference with our farming operation. More importantly, our state agricultural research contract was expanded to include fraud prevention, education, and community outreach, which meant additional income and job security for our family. The publicity from our case had also generated interest from other farmers dealing with harassment issues, leading to consulting opportunities that utilized my military experience and agricultural knowledge. But the best part of Monica's conviction was the peace of mind that came from knowing she couldn't hurt other families the way she tried to hurt ours. Every night when Emma and I sat down for dinner in our quiet farmhouse, knowing that Monica was in a federal prison cell instead of planning her next victim, I felt grateful for the legal system that had protected us and the community that had supported us through the worst of her attacks. For the first time in months, Emma could focus on her studies and college preparations without worrying about harassment or threats. And I could concentrate on farming without looking over my shoulder for the next crisis. That Tuesday evening, exactly 1 month after Monica's sentencing, I found a manila envelope under my truck's windshield wiper when I came home from checking the evening crops. Inside was a photo of Emma at yesterday's Harvest Festival preparation meeting, circled in red ink with a handwritten note. Pretty girls shouldn't celebrate too early. Monica had friends. Who's still watching our family? Have you ever felt like someone was watching your family? Tell us what you do in the comments. The threatening photo under my windshield wiper was professionally taken with a telephoto lens, which meant whoever was watching our family had expensive equipment and knew how to use it without being detected. More troubling was the note's implication that Monica had been working with accomplices who were still free and potentially continuing her predatory operations in other communities. Detective Stone took the threat seriously enough to assign protective surveillance to our property and coordinate with federal investigators who'd been tracking similar agricultural fraud operations across multiple states. Mr. Brooks, Ryan explained during an emergency meeting at our kitchen table. We've been hoping something like this would happen because it gives us the opportunity to identify and capture Monica's remaining network members. The federal investigation that followed was more extensive than anything I'd imagined possible for a rural harassment case. FBI agricultural crime specialists from Des Moines and Kansas City converged on Jefferson County to investigate what they described as a multi-state criminal enterprise targeting vulnerable rural families. Agent Laura Cooper, who led the federal task force, explained that Monica's operation was part of a larger pattern of sophisticated fraud schemes designed to exploit the trust and isolation that characterize rural communities. Agricultural fraud is a growing problem because rural families often have valuable property and assets, but limited access to legal resources. Agent Cooper told me during a briefing that included law enforcement representatives from 6 different states. The breakthrough in identifying Monica's accomplices came from Emma's continued analysis of digital evidence that she'd been preserving and organizing throughout our ordeal. My daughter had discovered that the threatening note contained trace fibers and chemical residues that could be analyzed for manufacturing information. And the photograph itself contained metadata that revealed the specific camera model and settings used to capture Emma's image. More importantly, Emma had been quietly monitoring social media accounts and online forums where Monica's known associates might be communicating using techniques she'd learned during her digital investigation courses. "Dad," Emma announced one evening while showing me her research, "I think I found them." The online investigation revealed a network of 6 individuals operating across Texas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Arkansas who were using Monica's techniques to target rural families in exactly the same systematic ways she'd operated in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Iowa. The accomplices were sharing information about successful harassment strategies, trading templates for fake legal documents, and coordinating their operations to avoid detection by moving between states and cockies in patterns designed to stay ahead of law enforcement investigations. Agent Cooper's team was able to track financial transactions between the network members that proved they'd been operating as a coordinated criminal enterprise for over 4 years. The coordinated arrests happened on the same Thursday morning across 4 states, with FBI agents simultaneously raiding properties in 6 different locations and seizing computers, financial records, and evidence of fraud operations that had victimized over 80 rural families. The scope of the criminal network was staggering. Nearly $500,000 in fraudulent collections, dozens of families forced from their properties, and systematic documentation of predatory targeting techniques that could have been used to victimize hundreds more families if the operation hadn't been exposed. Agent Cooper called it the largest agricultural fraud network ever discovered and prosecuted at the federal level. The arrest of Monica's accomplices eliminated the threat to our family's safety. But more importantly, it protected countless other rural families who would have become victims of systematic predatory targeting. Each network member had been planning expansion operations in new states with detailed research files on potential victims and sophisticated equipment for document forgery and harassment campaigns. The financial assets seized during the arrests provided a victim compensation fund that helped dozens of families recover from the economic damage caused by years of systematic fraud and harassment. Emma's role in identifying and exposing the criminal network had attracted national attention from agricultural organizations and law enforcement agencies interested in her digital investigation techniques. The American Farm Bureau Federation invited Emma to speak at their national convention about fraud prevention and digital security for rural families. The National Agricultural Law Center offered her a research position that would begin during her freshman year at Iowa State University, focusing on developing educational resources to help farming families protect themselves from sophisticated fraud schemes. Our community's response to the final resolution of Monica's case was a celebration that brought together farming families from across central Iowa for what we called the Justice Harvest Festival. The festival was held on our property with permission from the State Agricultural Research Program, featuring a parade of farm equipment that included my grandfather's 1998 John Deere as the centerpiece of a celebration of rural resilience and community solidarity. Emma gave a keynote speech to over 3,000 attendees about the importance of documentation and community cooperation in fighting agricultural fraud. The festival parade was an emotional high point that symbolized everything our family and community had accomplished together. I drove that old John Deere through downtown Jefferson County with Emma beside me, both of us wearing T-shirts that said, "Rural Families Fight Back," and waving to crowds of neighbors, farmers, and supporters who'd stood with us throughout the ordeal. Behind us came a procession of farm equipment representing dozens of families who'd been victims of agricultural fraud in various forms, followed by law enforcement vehicles representing the agencies that had helped us achieve justice and protection. But the most satisfying moment of the entire celebration was seeing Monica's former property the Henderson place, where she'd planned her predatory operation, now owned by a young farming family who'd moved to Iowa from Nebraska, specifically because they'd heard about our community's reputation for supporting agricultural families against harassment and fraud. The new owners, Jim and Kate Miller, with their 3 young children, had restored the property to productive agricultural use and established it as a demonstration farm for sustainable farming techniques that would benefit the entire community. The financial recovery for all of Monica's victims exceeded our most optimistic expectations because the federal asset forfeiture laws allowed the government to seize not just Monica's personal property, but also the financial gains achieved by her entire criminal network. The Victim Compensation Fund distributed over $400,000 to affected families, covering legal expenses, lost income, property damage, and emotional trauma counseling for children who'd been victimized by fake child services investigations and harassment campaigns. The long-term impact of our case extended far beyond Jefferson County and the specific families who'd been victimized by Monica's network. The federal prosecution established legal precedents for protecting agricultural families from systematic harassment, and the investigation techniques developed by Emma and the FBI task force became the foundation for a national agricultural fraud prevention program administered by the Department of Agriculture. Rural communities across America now have access to resources and training that help them identify and respond to sophisticated fraud schemes before families can be victimized. Emma's scholarship and internship opportunities had evolved into a full career path that combined her interests in agricultural engineering and digital forensics with her passion for protecting rural families from predatory targeting. Iowa State University created a specialized program in agricultural law enforcement that would allow Emma to pursue graduate studies while working with the State Agricultural Crime Unit on developing new techniques for fraud prevention and victim protection. My daughter had turned her traumatic experience into a platform for systemic change that would protect thousands of families from similar victimization. As the Harvest Festival wound down that evening and our neighbors began heading home with their families, Emma and I stood beside my grandfather's tractor and watched the sunset over fields that had been protected by 3 generations of Brooks family stewardship. The state agricultural research contract had been renewed for another 10 years with expanded funding and research objectives, ensuring that our family's farming operation would continue contributing to agricultural science while providing financial security for Emma's education and our community's economic development. As I drove the decorated tractor through the cheering festival crowd that final evening, Emma pointed to a figure in the distance photographing our celebration with a telephoto lens. The person saw Emma pointing and quickly disappeared into the crowd. But not before I recognized the face of a television news reporter who'd been covering our story for agricultural publications. But for just a moment, my heart had stopped, remembering the months of fear and uncertainty before justice finally prevailed. How is this person connected to Monica? And why are they still free? The answer was simple and satisfying. They weren't connected to Monica at all. They were journalists and agricultural advocates documenting our community's victory over systematic fraud, ensuring that our story would be preserved and shared with rural families across America who might face similar challenges in the future. The real victory wasn't just Monica's imprisonment or the compensation fund, or even Emma's scholarship opportunities. The real victory was knowing that no predator would ever again be able to terrorize rural families the way Monica had terrorized ours. Because communities like ours had learned to fight back with knowledge, documentation, and unity. Our story became proof that when rural families stand together with technology, law enforcement, and determination, no criminal network can survive. And sometimes the very thing they try to steal, like an old John Deere tractor, becomes the symbol of their complete defeat. If this story resonated with you, hit that like button to help us reach more people who need to hear these truths. Thanks for watching Anti-HOA Association, and we'll see you in the next video, where we uncover another story that needs to be told.